Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very empowering show coming right up with special guest Craig Kolavo, and he's here today to share with us his new book, I Am God in Disguise, So Are You. Now, Craig's original intentions for writing this book was to share some of his discoveries during his amazing life adventure with his children. Craig said, maybe all parents feel this way. Why should my kids have to go through the same suffering and struggles that I did? I know stuff. Although this is not a children's book, the inspirational message is universal and can apply to all ages. Craig believes that we share the same collective purpose, which is to discover the divine within, surrender to its power, and inspire others on this path. So let's welcome to the show, Craig Kolavo.
Well, thanks, Marianne. And first, I just want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my message with your audience.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I am so delighted you're here, and thank you so much. Once I picked up your book, I could not put it down. It is a fabulous book, absolutely fabulous. And I think a lot of times, when someone picks up a book like this, they're not quite sure what they're getting. But with yours, it's so inspirational.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. My main goal was to take a subject matter which I found to be very, very complicated in all the books I've read over the years. And my goal was to simplify or demystify this message to make it more accessible to everyone. So I'm glad you found it that way.
Yeah, I found it to be a great read. And so I have to ask you, what started you on this spiritual path?
Well, I would say, first of all, I believe that we are all born on our spiritual path. But for me, so in other words, I guess the answer for me would be when did I become aware, or when did I become a player, a conscious player in this game of life, as I like to call it. And during the writing process, I kind of discovered I was somewhere between 30 and 32 years old, and it was kind of a series of events that took place over a 2-3 week period. I was invited by a friend. It was actually a girl I was dating at the time to go to a meet. She went to these weekly meetings, workshops, she called them, and she invited me to go with her. And I went on one of them, and it was ended up being a Course in Miracles workshop. And Marianne, to be honest with you, I didn't really understand a lot of the conversations. I was so clueless. I was such a sleepwalker at this point in my life. But it was my first introduction to this kind of language. I thought it was kind of strange. They used the G word a little bit too much. I was uncomfortable with it. And then maybe a week or two later, some other folks invited me to a Sunday service, and I kind of laughed. I explained I wasn't a religious guy, not very churchy, and it ended up they were going to Unity Church in Houston, and it was actually pretty good, I must admit. It was a non-denominational. Are you familiar with Unity at all?
Oh yeah, I've gone to Unity churches all across the U.S.
Okay, well that was my first experience, and it was a good experience. There was a very, very positive, uplifting message, and I enjoyed that. So the same day, I want to say it was right after service, I went and found the restroom at the church, and there was a poster in the hallway, and the poster was promoting an upcoming speaker, and the speaker happened to be Wayne Dyer. And I immediately went into the bookstore and bought a ticket, and a week or so later went to see Wayne Dyer speak at the Unity Church. So if I was more conscious at the time, I would have seen the universe nudging me in this direction, boom, boom, 3 things in a row within, 2-3 week period. So after reading Wayne's book, I just closed the mini blinds, locked the door, and put on my headphones and kind of took his advice and tried some guided meditation. And it was at that point where I really discovered for the first time that inner guide, so to speak. It was the first time I didn't feel, I guess you can say I didn't feel alone. And just, I started to get the results from that meditation.
Well, I love this story because it just shows how you can get inspiration no matter where you are. You just have to be open to seeing it, but also how encouraging it is that people can realize that they're never alone, even though a lot of times, we're going through this epidemic where people are feeling more lonely now than ever.
True. And I don't know, I don't know how to explain it, but when I made this discovery at 32 years old, I actually felt like, for a brief moment, I felt like, oh my God, I've arrived. I'm an enlightened man. I'm now awakened, and I had this like blissful feeling for, I don't know, a couple weeks or maybe a couple days. I don't remember, but very shortly after that, I was reminded that my loyal bodyguard or this separate self, this ego that we create, shortly after we're born, wasn't quite ready to give up the throne. So I'm embarrassed to say it probably took me, Marianne, it took me maybe 20 years, maybe till I was 50 or 52 years old, before I was really able to surrender to this dormant power, the sleeping giant, is what I call it in the book, that I find lies dormant within all of us. So I've kind of discovered these 6 stages that we all must go through in our life, and unfortunately, that stage between discovery and surrender, for me at least, lasted 20 years. So maybe one of my goals is to help others on this path so it doesn't take them so long, so they're not as stubborn as me. Maybe this could be a roadmap for others. You can't skip any of these steps, but maybe I can shine a light on the path so you can walk a little quicker.
Well, isn't that great? Because I've heard it said once before that we're all walking each other home. And if we're able to provide any hope or inspiration to others along their path, how fulfilling is that?
Right. Well, you asked, your first question was about how did I get started. My first intention for writing was simply to share with my kids some of the experiences that I've had on this awesome adventure. Maybe all parents feel this way at some point. Why should my kids have to go through the same crap, the same struggles and pain and suffering that I've been through? I know stuff. So I'm lucky that I've been a seeker for decades, and what that means is I've been journaling like crazy. So I pulled out my boxes of journals and I spread them all out on the kitchen table, and from beginning to end, it was about a 2-year process. But what I tried to do was I just tried to organize and put in some chronological order, these experiences, the aha moments, the good, the bad, and the ugly, so I could explain it to them. And I don't know, it was probably 4 or 5 months into the process where I kind of stepped back and I saw the story unfolding before me. And it was exciting and terrifying at the same time. And what I mean by that is I was excited to have the clarity and to see what I've been living through and why. The terrifying part came from knowing that I couldn't just keep this to myself anymore, or I couldn't just share this with my kids. I knew that there would be a day that, for example, I'd be talking to you on the phone and I would be trying to share this message with the world. And to be honest with you, even today, it's, it's kind of terrifying thought. But here we are anyway. Yeah, it quickly went from just being an outline or a project for my kids to being something much bigger than that.
Well, I applaud you because I know how difficult it is when we look at our path and we look at our spiritual path, because especially if we have businesses, we're in the world and we're working, some of the spiritual stuff can sometimes seem like it's a little woo-woo. I know when I first started seeing energy when I was a kid and shut it off and then saw it again later when I was 30, I mean, I was joking around with my friends going, either I need a padded room or I'm seeing things, So
Right.
there's this little bit of a pull and a push, but that's part of what our spiritual journey is all about, is this whole process that unfolds for us, which is unique to each of us.
Exactly. And it's exciting, but like you just said, scary at the same time. I mean, it was like, when I say I stepped back and saw it unfolding, it was like someone gave me a freaking treasure map. Unfortunately, this map was in puzzle form, and the pieces were given to me over years and years. In other words, I didn't have access to this treasure map when I was in my 20s. But I was able to put these pieces together, and like I said, I discovered these 6 stages that we all must go through, whether we like it or not. And I guess in a nutshell, if I had to kind of explain my message, I believe that we're all born into this world as a body and a soul, and as human beings, we all share the same purpose. And this should actually be comforting to many. I mean, over the years, I've heard more people complain about not knowing what their purpose is, and they have a lot of frustration, anxiety around that. I believe we all share the same collective purpose as human beings, and that is to discover, surrender, and inspire. That's it, 3 words in a nutshell. Discover this dormant power, this sleeping giant that we're all born with, surrender to this power, and then inspire others on this path. So as I said in the beginning, my mission now is just to simplify, demystify this path and help others move from discovery through surrender. And hell, who knows? Maybe we'll get lucky and we could start a spiritual revolution. I mean, if you look around, Marianne, there's, like you said, there's a lot of people who seem to be lost right now. And I feel if more people can awaken to this simple message I'm trying to convey, the world can change. And I'm not talking about generations. It can be instantaneous.
Well, and I love that because a lot of times, excuse me, when you hear about change, people do think generational. Like, oh, it can't impact me today and can't be that easy. And so I'd like for you to kind of break some of this down for us. And I wanted to start with like the book's title, because I know for some people that might throw them. But once you start reading the book and really understanding, the book itself, it makes perfect sense.
Well, that's a great question, because the book's title has been surprisingly controversial. I mean, I understood going into this that my title was bold, or you can call it strong, or even blunt, but I never really expected controversial to be to be the name for it. But I believe also I push back from this being lumped into a new age message. I actually believe this is age-old message. I mean, going back to the Hindu scriptures, to the Vedas, Buddhism, 2,000 years ago with the Bible. For example, the quote, "Do you not know you are God's temple and God's spirit dwells in you?" That sure sounds like I am God in disguise to me. So, I don't know, maybe it would help if I defined how I explain God. For me, Marianne, God is this life force, this vibrating energy that animates every cell in my body. and also it flows through all of creation. I mean, even doctors say that somewhere between the 22nd and 30th day after conception, there's this spark of energy that just comes from nowhere. That is how I define God. And since this energy cannot be destroyed, if you want to kind of fast forward, when these bodies of ours wear out and it's time to move on from this planet, that energy is just reabsorbed. You know, we all return to source. And you know, when Einstein discussed this subject, he said, "Hey, this is physics. This isn't philosophy." So I don't know. Like you said, this, I know it can sound woo-woo, but it's physics.
Well, and science is kind of coming full circle with that now, where before it was, there was a really disbelief in any kind of afterlife and anything else, and now it's kind of coming to, maybe there is something there.
Exactly. You know, there's a Catholic priest. He's actually quickly becoming one of my favorite authors. He's a best-selling author. His name's Richard Rohr, R-O-H-R, and he's been a Catholic priest for over 50 years. And he said that maybe humanity was not ready for this message 2,000 years ago. And like you just said, Marianne, I think technology and science catching up with what the spiritual gurus have been preaching for thousands of years, that might help make this message a little bit easier to swallow now. Because that's what Richard Rohr says. He says, maybe the time is now. Maybe 2,000 years ago, it was a huge leap of faith to believe in this invisible world. But now, I mean, we have the high-powered microscope, right? And we see this vibrating energy. We see these particles are 99% vibrating energy. And we see, we're not solid like we thought we were. And, not only are we, 99% empty space, we're actually interconnected with each other. When Jesus is preaching, we're all one, that was probably a lot harder to swallow back then, than it is right now. So I believe that people complain about technology is kind of ruining the younger generation, it's hurting spirituality, but in a way, it might help spirituality. I mean, we need to believe in the soul, and the soul is this invisible part of our being. And until we discover it and believe in it, well, you're going to have a hard time evolving on this spiritual path. Just because, the soul isn't going to show up in a selfie doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So nowadays, thanks to science and technology, every day we pick up our TV remote controls. I can send a text message right now and hit send, and my friend in London is reading it in seconds and replying to me. You know what? I don't know how that works. Call it faith in the invisible world, and that's exactly what we need to have. That's the same reasoning we need to have with believing in this, invisible nature of the divine.
Well, we've covered some very heavy topics. You define God, you define the soul. So how about, but you've made it really simple so people can understand how this is all connected. And I think that's really kind of the crux that people get stuck on sometimes.
So if I can maybe break down these 6 stages, I like to start with just explaining briefly the first 3, because the first 3, it's kind of before and after discovery. So we all start this path at birth, obviously. I like to call it alien birth, just kind of in a humorous, tongue-in-cheek kind of way. The definition, Marianne, that I found for alien was just so perfect I couldn't resist. It's any being foreign to its current environment, an outsider belonging to a very different place. So, I mean, the way I see birth, I feel like we are pulled from this invisible world of pure energy into the world of form. And, so using the word alien for alien birth, just kind of makes sense to me. Before we can move into the second stage, which is the school of life, two very important things must happen. First of all, the divine part of our nature, the soul, the spirit, whatever you want to call it, has to voluntarily step aside. The soul takes a back seat. Man cannot serve two masters, and there's no mistakes here. The soul voluntarily decides to step aside because we need to go into the school of life fully focused on learning, just to learn about human nature, learn the ropes, become street smart. So when the soul steps aside, very early in our development, we discover this primal fear. It's the first time we feel alone. And this primal fear leads us to create what I call the bodyguard. And this bodyguard is our trusty, loyal companion for many, many years to come. He's going to protect us and lead us on this adventure, whether it's the school of life or through the epic battle, whatever it may be. Some people are stuck in the school of life forever. I mean, for your whole life, you're going to be in this stage, or for lifetimes, plural, depending on what you believe in. So we go from birth into the school of life with our loyal friend, the bodyguard, our separate self, and everything in the school of life is designed not only to teach us about human nature, but to lead us to discovery. And then that brings us to the third stage, which is discovery. When you have that aha moment, when the school of life finally wears you down and you put your head in your hands and you say, come on, is there more to life than this? And literally, it's not hocus pocus. You literally look within and you say those words. Are you going to believe life's a bitch and then you die? Because it will be if you don't make it to this discovery stage. And Marianne, I kid you not, it's like saying open sesame. The magic is revealed when you finally look within and say those words. It's funny. People have asked me the most common questions about this discovery. They're like, well, did you have a vision or a near-death experience, or was this book channeled? And I kind of laugh. It wasn't that exciting. I wish it was that exciting. It wasn't. It was just kind of a slow, gradual process that I think is accessible to all of us. Did I have a vision? I have visions every day. Part of my daily spiritual practice is meditation, and part of that is doing visualizations and affirmations. I believe that imagination is the mind of God. Imagination is our engine for manifesting. So yeah, part of my meditation is I close my eyes and I visualize the ideal life, how I want the world to be. And, you have to believe it before you can see it. So that kind of got you from birth through the school of life to discovery. And I hate to go so fast through it, but I know you and I have a limited amount of time here.
Oh, we've got all the time in the world. Don't worry about that.
Okay.
But you touched on something I would like for you to share with our listeners, and it's those aha moments. So when we have those, what is that? Is that like a marker in the road? What does that mean to us?
Boy, that's a great question. I feel like on the occasions that I've had those moments, it's a direct communication from your inner guide. It's this intuition. It happens all the time now that I have surrendered, where this line of communication is now open between me and my soul, my spirit. When I close my eyes and I actually communicate, with that part of myself. But I would say that before we reach the stage of discovery and surrender, we have a tendency to label those moments as aha moments because it shocks us. It's like, oh shit, where did that come from? And it's because you feel this part of your being, the sleeping giant that's now awakening, trying to communicate with you. And it's exciting, and it might startle you at first, and that's why we label it as aha moments. But after awakening and after you surrender, after your bodyguard lays down his sword and says, you know what, I'm going to turn the controls over to the universal mind, so to speak, those aha moments it's not so dramatic. It becomes a daily communication. It's a very cool thing.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Craig Kolavo in regards to his new book, I Am God in Disguise, So Are You. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
There are nearly 2 million Americans living with amputation. Many live right here in San Antonio. Becoming an amputee can be scary, frustrating, isolating, but there's no reason to feel alone. The San Antonio Amputee Foundation is here to help support you and guide you toward resources such as home and car modifications and even prosthetic limbs. For more information or to make a donation, visit saamputee.org. We'll help you live a full, active life, one step at a time. San Antonio Amputee Foundation, healing limbs, hearts, and souls.
If not me, then who? This ethos is driving the Travis Manion Foundation to empower veterans and families of fallen heroes to develop character in future generations. In 2007, Marine First Lieutenant Travis Manion was killed in Iraq while saving his wounded teammates. Travis's legacy lives on in the 5 words he spoke before leaving for his final deployment. If not me, then who? Guided by this mantra, veterans continue their service, developing strong relationships in the community and thrive in their post-military lives. Visit TravisManion.org and ensure the character of our nation's heroes lives on in the next generation. If not me, then who?
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with special guest Craig Kolavo, and he's sharing with us his new book, I Am God in Disguise, and So Are You. Now, Craig, I was thinking, things come up, we hit these times where we feel like we've reached a certain point of spiritual enlightenment, and then from there, like how you were talking about earlier, then realize, okay, well, there's a new pedal to this. There's more to this story. So we're able to dive deeper into our spiritual walk.
And mentioning that I'm kind of embarrassed that it took me 20 years to get from stage 3 discovery to stage 4, or to get to surrender, really, to be more exact. And I did a lot of time examining and soul searching why it takes us so long. Why are we stuck in this epic battle for years, and in my case, 2 decades? And I kind of came up with a short list of my excuses. One was just a fear of change. I mean, fear or change can be scary. The unknown can be scary. And, for a long time, I kind of had this attitude, hey, you know what? Life might be a struggle, but right now it's safe, it's predictable, I'm good. Number 2 would be it's easier to be a victim. Becoming a conscious player and to surrender in life takes a lot of responsibility. We have to take responsibility for our current conditions in life. You have to look at your world and say, yep, I attracted everything that's in my life right now. And not everyone's willing and ready to do that. Another one is we feel shame or guilt. Unfortunately, and this is where I depart from a lot of the spiritual experts or other books in this genre, a lot of experts say that forgetting our divine nature is the root of all evil. And I think that's the biggest bunch of BS. As I mentioned when we first started this conversation, forgetting our divine nature is a necessary part of our spiritual evolution. We have to forget before we can enter the school of life. So our goal throughout life is to rediscover this part of ourselves. That's true. So you can say remembering might be the root, or not remembering might be the root of all evil. So anyway, we get back to this shame or guilt. Hey, it's too late for me. I've ignored you for too long. Speaking of our divine nature. For me, another one was, what will other people think of me? At this point as a seeker, I don't know. I kind of thought spiritual people were kind of weird. They didn't look like me. They didn't dress like me. The books I was buying at the spiritual bookstore, these guys had turbans and long beards. No offense to my turban-wearing, bearded friends. I still love and study your books every day. But at this point in my journey, I was not very courageous. And that was a big deal. I didn't want to be looked at as weird. Another one is addictions. Something that happens, Marianne, when the soul takes the back seat or steps aside for the school of life, what happens is we have this empty feeling, this void deep inside of us, and we don't really know what it is. And we're always searching externally because we're totally unaware. Remember, we have this temporary amnesia. The sleeping giant is in hibernation. So, we, unfortunately, a lot of the things we're looking towards to fill that void are very addictive. I mean, whether it doesn't have to be drugs and alcohol. I mean, it was for me to some extent. But everyone's addicted to something. Sugar, food, video games. I mean, you name it. It's all stuff to distract us. And these addictions delay our surrender. They delay our spiritual evolution because we're focused on feeding the monster instead of communicating with our spirit and, going out there and having an excellent adventure. So I guess in a nutshell, those are just a handful of the reasons that I identified why it took me, 20 damn years to get to the point of where I finally said, yes, I'm ready. I'm ready to surrender.
I think it takes other people longer periods of time. Some people have it shorter. It doesn't seem that there's any, right time that it takes a person to reach whatever, their spiritual path development should be. It's a very interesting journey, but I have to really compliment you because I know, we've had discussions before. Your book is just amazing. And no matter what, you're a very optimistic type of person. And we're going through some really turbulent times. How do you remain so positive?
Well, yeah, you're right. If you look around the world, not just our country, but globally, it seems like we're in chaos. I don't mean to laugh about it, but if you don't laugh, you'll cry. You know what? I believe in this theory of collective pain and collective joy. And what I mean by it, let me start with the easy one. Collective joy. For example, I took my son to the World Series a couple of years ago. He lives in Houston, and the Houston Astros won the World Series. I think it was 2017. And I'll tell you what, Marianne, the joy felt on the streets in that stadium. And it didn't matter if you were young, old, black, white. It was like one big group hug. Now, on the other side of the coin, collective pain. And again, let me just reflect on my many, many years living in Houston. Many hurricanes in the 30 years I was there came through town. And if there's one thing that'll bring people together more than a natural disaster, this collective pain, when the rescue boat pulls up at your front door, they're not going to ask you who you voted for. Once again, it didn't matter, skin color, nationality, sexual preference, everyone came together. And I believe that these highly emotional states, whether it's joy or pain, I believe it's baked into our DNA. This is humanity. This is who we really are. And I believe that this political era that we're in right now is one of those times of high emotional states. And I see it happening. I see people organizing. I see people coming together and, wanting to let their voices be heard and in a positive way. So, yes, I do believe that the era that we're going through right now is going to prove to be a blessing in disguise.
We live in such a great time in history, I think, where, while there's a lot of turmoil and tragedy that's going on, as you said, there's so many people that are coming up and helping each other and working with one another in ways that, when a disaster happens, we also see the positive aspect of what's happening within our communities.
Exactly. Something funny happened just this weekend. I had a few people in town visiting, and on Sunday morning, we're all sitting on the back porch drinking coffee, and we are having a conversation about politics, about climate, and it was spirited. I mean, and people from both sides of the aisle. And I had to actually say, after about an hour, I just said, hey, hold on for a second, time out. I go, you know how awesome this is that we're having this conversation? I know for a fact, and this is just in my little world, maybe everyone's not like that. I wasn't having this conversation a few years ago. So this is what I mean. People are getting excited and motivated, and I think that's a good thing. I think that this spiral, this chaos in the world, it didn't start on September 11th, 2001. It didn't start November 8th, 2016. This has been building for decades. And I think that a very loud, obnoxious minority have been ruling the silent, often silent majority for decades. And, us silent majority are now rising up and speaking up. It's almost like we've been too polite to speak up. It's kind of the word apathy comes to mind. And, now I'm kind of excited to see people, hey, you know what? If you don't like what you see, do something. So that's why I'm optimistic in turbulent times.
Well, I'm glad that you shared that with us, because I think it helps a lot of people kind of understand how they can make shifts themselves in their perspective when things aren't really coming out the way that they would hope they would.
Exactly. And, I said my book is not about religion or politics, but I do believe that after you discover this divine within and it becomes a part of your everyday life, you're communing with it, that you can no longer define your neighbors or any other human being by their skin color or nationality or sexual preference. I mean, you peel back all these layers, all these superficial labels, and you become to realize that we are all one. And when you do get to that point, it affects all facets of your life. So yeah, I say it's not political, but it's going to affect. You can never support leaders at any level, whether it's on your student council, at your kid's school, or your mayor of your town. You would never support any leaders that actively talk about fear-mongering and hate and separation. I mean, it's just impossible. I mean, the concept, of hating each other when you're all one, it just becomes ridiculous. It'd be like seeing two branches on a tree strangling each other. I mean, it just becomes so absurd. So, in that respect, you will change, how you feel. And, I believe, and I don't mind shifting gears off of politics, because I do believe there are good people on both sides of the aisle. I'm hoping that people have the courage to stand up and just speak their mind, because there's good people really everywhere. So
I would agree with you. And you really touched on something too. The tree doesn't hate its branches, just like we wouldn't hate our right arm compared to our left arm,
I know. It kind of becomes ridiculous. And again, I also say that the book isn't religious. And if I can just touch on that briefly before I forget, with a book whose title has the big G word on the cover, how could it not be religious? I believe that the message in this book can supercharge any existing religious practice you might have. If you follow one of the, many great religious traditions that are out there, or it can possibly stand alone as its own religion. I don't know. I was raised Catholic, and as a young adult, I kind of studied the history of religions in one of my college classes, and I kind of came to the conclusion that religions have done more over the centuries to separate us than they have to unite us. So just personally for me, I've chosen not to pick a team, so to speak. But so to say I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, I almost cringe at that cliche, only because so many people say that these days. But maybe this primal way that I'm trying to describe, throughout the book, I talk about primal fear and our primal language of intuition, our primal purpose in life, primal. Maybe this primal way I'm trying to explain to everyone, maybe this is my religion. I mean, after all, religion is just a set of beliefs, values, a foundation that we build our life on. So maybe instead of saying, I'm not a religious guy, I'm a spiritual guy, maybe I'm a religious guy, but it's just not a traditional religion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think that makes perfect sense. I think a lot of times people use the differences because they don't have another language to use. It's because they
Hmm.
look at having this personal journey with God or their higher source or the universe, where they choose to call it, and they're not quite sure how that fits in with, religion.
Exactly. Exactly. So I've gotten emails from readers just over the past couple weeks who've identified themselves as being Jewish or very Catholic, or actually a couple of Mormon people actually sent me an email. And there's been a common denominator where they're telling me that, hey, loved your book. This is very similar to the message we've learned in our church. And it kind of blows me away, but it shouldn't, because in the end, there really is only one message and no religion can claim it. I mean, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to roll back the clock to day one. And on day one, when we were born into this world as body and soul, we were all the same. This is before we were influenced by any organized religion. So, this should not be threatening to any religion. It should be universal. And I hope that it's kind of a common thread that unites us, a common thread that might run through all religions. Hey, you know what? We all share the same divine within. I mean, who can argue about that, Marianne?
I don't know many people that can, but I have to tell you, Craig, you have a gift for breaking things down to these universal truths that most people were like, oh, yeah, that makes sense, without having to get so bogged down with everything else. And that's why I so appreciate your book, I Am God in Disguise, So Are You, because it does break things down to a really simple way of understanding.
well, I appreciate that. And again, that was one of my main goals, this demystification. I can't tell you how many books I've read that I've read. Have you ever read a book where you're stuck on the same page, reading it over and over, just trying to absorb what the message is?
Oh, I
I
don't know if I'll
promise.
admit to that.
Right. Well, you know what? I promise you, you might not agree with everything, all my ideas in my book, but I promise you, you will clearly understand all my ideas. You won't have to read any of the pages twice.
You're 100% right about that. I did not, and it was an easy read. And yeah, it kind of brings me to my next question for you, because I know all this just dovetails so nicely with one another. How does forgiveness, compassion, and unconditional love work with your work?
Well, those are three things that they're probably the hardest lessons we must learn, really, before we need to accept these, before we get to surrender. We have to learn those traits. And I look at the school of life as more or less being elementary school. Everything in the school of life, as I said, is designed to lead us to discovery. The epic battle that I describe as the fourth stage in the book is more of higher education. Everything in the epic battle is designed to lead us to surrender. And these very, very difficult lessons of empathy, of compassion, of forgiveness are often taught in this stage. And I don't know, for example, there's times that we have to be both the victim and a victimizer before we can learn a lesson. And just to give you an example, um, let's say you were bullied in school. I mean, if that's not bad enough, that you're a victim of bullying and that haunts you most of your childhood, and then fast forward 15, 20 years and you find yourself as a bully in your workplace. If you awaken during this phase, you'll discover that you've been a victim, and now you're continuing this cycle. And you can break the cycle if you can just, reach that level of discovery. If you can find your place on this path to surrender. Or, for example, if you're a single mom and your mother was abusive when you were a child, and again, fast forward 15, 20 years, and you find yourself lashing out at your children. Again, the same thing. You can break this cycle by awakening. So, that's another reason why it's so important for me to just get this message out. It's so life-changing. And again, it's so simple in a nutshell. Discover, surrender, and then the final stage is to get to where we want to inspire others on this path. I discovered the hero's journey, this Joseph Campbell's journey. He talks about how we go full circle, and once we conquer our demons and we discover our divine nature, we want to go back to our communities, back to our tribe, and you can't help yourself. You want to tell everyone what you've learned. And that's kind of where I feel like I'm at right now. That's my new mission in life. I say that we all share the same primal purpose, the same collective purpose as human beings. But where we get to break free from the pack is in this final stage where we inspire others. You get to choose. Do you want to be on a covert mission? Do you want to just start changing yourself, be the change, and inspire others in your family and in your community? Not everyone's going to go write a book or, start a podcast, but there's a lot of smaller ways that we can kind of move into this final phase of inspiration.
Well, there's so much that your book offers for people to make these positive impacts in their own life. And gosh, there's so much we haven't even covered or touched. I think I have time for one more question. And so I'm going to hit you with a big one here. So sorry about that. You talk about surrender. And I know in my own life, when I get to this point of surrender, that's kind of a tough one for me because, I'm a businesswoman, I have to take care of everything, and now you want me to surrender. And did you find for yourself that was like a really difficult part for you on your journey?
I think people get hung up on the word, and I find that women, and this is coming from my wife and a couple of others that I've had discussions with about surrender, it's almost giving up their power is a very negative term. If you look up the definition of surrender, it's not a good definition. To give in to the enemy, to give away your power. The surrender I am talking about it's the opposite of this. It is such a blissful, rewarding place. So when I reached that phase, to answer your question, I was so ready, because what happened is my bodyguard slowly but surely started just testing the waters, started letting the sleeping giant, who was now awake, started letting that part of me call the shots, and the results were amazing. The results of surrender, Marianne, you're on a health level. You have less stress in your life. You become more at ease. You start becoming kinder. Your health just improves dramatically. When you realize you're a temple of God, it's like, oh crap, I better get my house in order. Part of my daily spiritual practice is eating a healthy diet, drinking a lot of water, getting a good night's sleep, exercising. And yes, that's a spiritual practice. If I want to be a vehicle for God's expression, I want to be a freaking Ferrari. So our health improves dramatically once we surrender. Our personal life, you are going to see things happening. My wife literally moved in next door to me. So she landed on my doorstep once I reached this level of surrender, when I quit fighting against life and quit trying to force everything. My financial life, my business life changed dramatically. I used to be this guy at work that was studying spreadsheets and profit margins and sales quotas, and everything shifted. I just started to really, really care more about my employees, about their well-being, about their happiness. I started to really authentically care about making my customers happy and looking for solutions to their challenges, and not looking at just the dollars and cents. And you know what? The irony of that is when I surrendered to that, my sales tripled, my profits skyrocketed. So was surrender difficult for me? No, because the Bodyguard allowed this to happen a little bit at a time, and then finally when he saw that the giant wasn't out to kill him, that he really had good intentions for us, on this adventure of life, surrender was easy. It was amazing. And we've joked over this hour about it being a woo-woo thing or hocus pocus. For me, this communication is so real. I'm a firm believer in affirmations. I write them regularly, and it's kind of my language or code that I use to speak to my soul or my higher self. So do you mind if I share one with you real quick, Marianne?
Oh, I would love for you to.
So this is my surrender affirmation, and I swear I do this a few times a day. I was just out on my hike this morning. I'm hiking through nature, and I do it out loud. Luckily, no one's around to hear me. I literally put my hand on my chest when I do this because I kind of feel like the vibration also maybe assists me in this inner communication. And I'm not looking up into the sky. I'm not praying to some external God that's sitting in a throne up in the clouds somewhere. As I've been saying, you're looking within. We're not children anymore. We look within to the divine. And I just simply say, I surrender. I am Superman, servant of the soul, vehicle for your expression. I devote myself to you. This is our disguise. Show me the way. And that's it. I mean, I timed this when I was shaving the other day. I set the timer on my phone, and it took 28 seconds. And there's a brief little prayer I add at the end that just says, may your light, love, energy, and courage strengthen in our body and soul and radiate through me to all. For I am your miracle worker. Let the magic begin. And I timed it all together, and it was still less than a minute. So since I have that memorized, Marianne, I literally say it all day long. I'm sitting in traffic. I'm out for a hike, whatever. I did it before you and I started our interview because I was kind of anxious, kind of nervous about having this conversation. But it frees me, and it's not woo-woo. And I'm telling you, if those of you who are listening who think this might be a bunch of crap, please just fake it until you feel it. You will slowly but surely see results, and you'll be hooked. You'll be doing it every day.
Well, that's part of the whole journey, is being able to, just kind of get into it and learn as you go, because that's what we're all doing, And your book, I felt, was such a wonderful resource for people who are just like, hey, I'm here, I'm inquisitive, I want to kind of move forward. I don't want something that's going to conflict with my religion, or maybe I'm just on a spiritual path, but I want to pick up something that's going to help me move forward. And your book does that.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And again, I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to shout this out. I feel like I'm losing my voice. Have I been shouting?
You may have been, but I think it's more spiritually.
All right. Well,
Hey, Craig,
thank you.
so where can our listeners connect with you? Because I know that you have a website and you've got all these great things too. And I'm so lucky. I'm so blessed to have had you. You've got a couple of posters you just came out with. You've got these amazing things. So where can they connect with you and be part of your community?
Okay, thanks for asking. The website is awesome, and there's no E at the end of awesome. AWESOM. It's kind of like Om, like the Om symbol, Sanskrit. Awesome Life, LIFE.com. And as Marianne just mentioned, you can purchase the book there. I've got some posters and prints available, and these prints are designed to kind of be reminders for the message in the book. I believe that it's relatively easy to kind of be in this awareness when we are on our meditation or yoga mats, but to take this awareness off the mat and into the world, that's the challenging part. So for me, I've got these posters and prints stuck up all over my house. I've got one on my bathroom mirror. I've got one by the coffee pot. I've got one right here in the office. And they're just fun little reminders, that you are the divine within. And it's also a platform, my website, to communicate with the readers. I have a blog, and you can connect with me via email there as well.
Well, Craig, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Well, fantastic. Thanks again, and I hope to do it again soon.
Well, thank you, Craig. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you, and of course, to talk about your new book, I Am God in Disguise, So Are You. You can buy this book and feel good about what you're doing. 100% of the ebook proceeds will benefit water.org. Now, water.org is an organization that believes breaking the cycle of poverty starts with clean water. You can learn more about that organization and how to donate by visiting water.org. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.